Um, the bottom line is, I think there's overwhelming evidence that there was a global catastrophe, and we don't know how much was wiped out, and we don't know how these people, where they started over at. We don't know how far back in technology they were pushed back. So unfortunately, there's just this is what we have to go back to. Okay, now I want to get into what was really interesting to me. I'm just going to get rid of this for a second. A lot of my research has been on these lines, but I've also been extremely intrigued by the 33rd parallel. In the 33rd parallel, you have Mount Hermon, where is described the angels descended, the angels that later on created the Nephilim, or the giants. But not only that, you have on the 33rd parallel, you have also an alien visitation at Roswell. You have all the atomic bombs having been dropped on this location. You have Phoenix, Arizona, a representation of a solar deity. You have the Dropa incident that happened in China, which is just off the 33rd parallel, which is also, it's called the Roswell of China, which is an interesting story. So you have a lot of strange coincidences on the 33rd parallel. It's also known as the horse latitudes. And the reason they say that they're called the horse latitudes is because you have convection currents within the on the Earth that primarily you'll have a current start at the equator, rise and come down, and then you'll have it repeated in sequential spots across the globe. And between the 30 and 35th parallels, they consider that a horse latitude. And at these latitudes, the winds are just considered to be dead. And so the traditional theory, or folklore behind these, is the reason of that being called the horse latitude was due to the low amounts of winds, and the ships traveling who would dare travel through these latitudes would have to throw their horses overboard because of the threat of starvation and the threat of running out of water. But that didn't really make sense to me, because if they had these threats of, I would think they would just slaughter the horses rather than throw them overboard. There is the argument of dropping the weight of the ship so that it could move through this area faster because it was lighter, theoretically. But it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And I'm going to get into that. I just wanted to foreshadow that. But what I did discover about the 33rd parallel, which is a horse latitude, and which is curious, we also have images of horses around these lines. So you have an image here within a horse latitude of a horse, and who knows how old this is, but it's a giant horse engraved onto the side of a mountain. And I don't even believe they were supposed to have horses over here. So maybe this is relatively recent. However, that looks ancient. And you also have images of giant horses over by Stonehenge, which is related to our lines. And you got your horse, giant horse in the ground here. And I just started thinking about it, and I started thinking about, well, could there be any esoteric meaning to the horse latitudes? And I started to, I obviously, obviously the 33rd parallel has esoteric meaning, and I'm going to tell you what that is in a minute. And these lines have an esoteric meaning, and the horse latitudes really encompass this area. And I started thinking about it. I thought, well, horse sounds a lot like Horus. And, when you start getting into this stuff, you start finding the etymology of a lot of words have been taken from Egypt. And I've been studying some of the work of Michael Tessarion, and he talks about the Irish origins of civilization. And so you have this connection between Europe and Egypt, because he starts getting into how closely related the two were, the Celts and the Egyptians, and the mythologies, how they were all interrelated, which I showed you with the tree of knowledge, the tree of life. I've shown you in other videos. We can see, the snake mythology versus solar hero mythology has traveled everywhere. And you can see, just in our, interpretations of a horizon being related to Horus, and sunset being related to Set, his evil uncle. And so I started thinking about the horse latitudes and Horus. And so I did some searching, and it turned out that Horus was asked by his father Osiris what his favorite animal would be, a lion or a horse, and he chose the horse because while he claimed the lion is strong and much stronger than a horse, the horse will allow him to catch his fleeing enemy, which is Set. And so what I found, I'm just going to change this out here real quick. There's an image of Horus. It's going to load here in a second. There's an image of Horus on a horse. Oh, shoot, hold on. Here we go. Okay, so there's an image of Horus on a horse. And notice that the crocodile is not in battle with the horse. If he were, he would be represented facing the horse. He's running from the horse, and the horse is caught up with him. And so now we have Horus on the top, slaying what is the representation of Set, who has transformed himself into a crocodile. So this is not only a representation of the solar hero versus the sea monster, which is being represented by a crocodile. This also has another meaning. And if we get into what these lines actually represent, what the 33rd parallel is, the 33rd parallel is actually the only latitude where the sun's azimuth will rise to 33 degrees on the winter solstice and also match its latitude of 33 degrees. So if I were to go down and we were to drop to 25 degrees, well, the sun's azimuth on the winter solstice is going to be much higher than 33 degrees. If we were to go up, the sun's azimuth will drop and will be below 33 degrees at its pinnacle at noon on the winter solstice. This is the only representation of the sun being at 33 degrees at its pinnacle on the winter solstice and exactly matching the latitude. And so you could see why that would be important to the ancients, because that particular area would tell them what their exact latitude was by being able to measure the angle of the sun at 33 degrees on the winter solstice. So then they could position themselves latitude-wise. And that is why, that is one of the reasons why this is such an important area in history, and why the 33rd parallel is so important, and why sites like Phoenix, Arizona exist on the 33rd parallel as a representation of the sun, and why the atomic bombs are dropped on the 33rd parallel. It's because it has this solar meaning to it. Now, not only did I discover what the 33rd parallel was, I discovered what these lines actually represent. And I've shown this before, but not to this level. So if we go into the sun, where it shows us light and dark on the globe, and I go to the winter solstice. So we're going to winter solstice. Now the thing I've shown before without any commentary, hold on a second.